I was sitting in my apartment in Denver on a rainy Thursday evening, mindlessly scrolling through social media while eating leftover Chinese takeout, when I saw a photo that made my entire world collapse. There, on my coworker Jessica's Instagram story, was my father, wearing a black tuxedo and the biggest smile I'd seen on his face in years. He was standing next to a woman in an elegant cream-colored dress, surrounded by at least 50 people who were clearly celebrating something monumental. The woman was Elena Rodriguez, his girlfriend of 8 months. And according to the caption that Jessica had added, "Beautiful wedding tonight. Mr. Hayes looks so happy." This was their wedding ceremony. A wedding that had apparently happened just 2 hours ago. My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen, my chopsticks dropping onto my coffee table with a clatter that seemed to echo through my suddenly silent apartment. I scrolled through more of the photos, each one hitting me like a physical blow. There was my sister, Natalie, in the front row, wearing a gorgeous navy blue dress that I'd never seen before, tears of joy streaming down her face as she applauded. There was my Aunt Carmen, my cousin Derek, even my dad's old college roommate, Paul, who I hadn't seen in years. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that just 5 days ago, Natalie had called me with what I thought was devastating news. She'd told me, with what seemed like genuine sadness in her voice, that Dad and Elena had decided to postpone their wedding indefinitely because I had come down with a severe case of pneumonia and was hospitalized in the ICU. "Dad just can't bear the thought of getting married without both his daughters there," she'd said, her voice breaking slightly. "You know how sentimental he is about family. Elena completely understands, and they've decided to wait until you're fully recovered and can be part of their special day." I remember feeling touched by this news, even though I was disappointed about the postponement. It had seemed so typical of Dad to put family first, and I'd felt guilty that my illness, which didn't even exist, was causing them to delay their happiness. Except I wasn't sick. I had never been sick. I had been at work every single day that week, attending meetings, grabbing lunch with colleagues, going to my evening yoga class. I was perfectly, completely, 100% healthy. And my father had gotten married without me, while my entire family told everyone I was on my deathbed. As I sat there staring at those photos, my mind racing to piece together what had actually happened, I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was definitely shattered, something deeper than that. Something fundamental about my understanding of who my family was and where I fit into their lives. This wasn't just about missing a wedding. This was about discovering that the people I loved most in the world had deliberately orchestrated one of the most elaborate and cruel lies I'd ever encountered. And they'd done it so smoothly, so convincingly, that I'd actually felt grateful for their consideration of my non-existent illness. My name is Samantha Hayes. I'm 34 years old, and I've just learned that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my family was built on a foundation of lies. But to understand how something this devastating could happen, you need to understand the complicated dynamics that have shaped my family for decades. I grew up in the small town of Millbrook, Colorado, population 8,000, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and family connections run deep through generations. My sister Natalie is 2 years younger than me, but from the time we were children, she's possessed this almost supernatural ability to position herself at the center of every family situation, not through any particular accomplishment or talent, but through an intricate understanding of how to make herself seem absolutely essential to everyone else's emotional well-being. While I was the studious older sister who got good grades and stayed out of trouble, Natalie was the one who somehow always knew exactly what was happening in everyone's life. She remembered birthdays without being reminded, organized surprise parties, and had this way of making everyone feel like she was their closest confidant. Teachers loved her, neighbors adored her, and our parents treated her like she was the emotional glue that held our entire family together.
This continued well into our adult lives. After graduating from Colorado State University with a degree in computer science, I moved to Denver to work for a mid-sized software company called TechFlow Solutions. It's about a 3-hour drive from Millbrook, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough that I could build my own independent life. I found an apartment in a nice area of the city, made friends with my colleagues, and genuinely enjoyed the anonymity and opportunities that came with living in a larger city. Natalie, on the other hand, never left Millbrook. After finishing her associate's degree at the local community college, she got a part-time job at a boutique called Vintage Treasures on Main Street and moved into a small house just 10 minutes away from where we had grown up. This proximity allowed her to become even more deeply embedded in our father's daily life, especially after the tragedy that changed everything for our family.
4 years ago, our mother Linda died after an 18-month battle with ovarian cancer. Those final months were devastating for all of us, but they hit Dad the hardest. Mom had been his high school sweetheart, and they'd been married for 31 years when she passed away. Watching this strong, confident man who taught history at Millbrook High School for over 2 decades completely fall apart was one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my life. During Mom's illness and after her death, Natalie naturally stepped into the role of Dad's primary emotional support. She was the one who drove him to his grief counseling appointments, brought him home-cooked meals when he was too depressed to take care of himself, and made sure he wasn't spending too much time alone in the house that suddenly felt enormous and empty. I tried to help as much as I could, driving down from Denver every other weekend and calling Dad several times a week. But my work schedule was demanding, especially during product launch cycles, and I couldn't be there the way Natalie could. I felt guilty about this, but I also trusted that between the two of us, we were giving Dad the support he needed to eventually heal and find his way back to some kind of happiness. For almost 3 years after Mom's death, Dad seemed to be stuck in this gray area of grief. He went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, and spent most evenings reading or watching old movies that he and Mom used to enjoy together. Natalie and I both worried that he might never fully emerge from this emotional cocoon he'd built around himself. That's why we were both so thrilled when Dad started showing signs of life again about 10 months ago. He joined a community book club that met every other Wednesday at the Millbrook Public Library, something Natalie had been gently encouraging him to do for months. At first, he seemed to treat it more like a social obligation than something he actually enjoyed, but gradually we noticed that he started looking forward to those meetings. The change became even more dramatic when he started mentioning Elena Rodriguez, a fellow book club member who worked as a pediatric nurse at Millbrook General Hospital. Elena was 52, recently divorced after a 15-year marriage that had ended amicably when she and her ex-husband realized they'd grown into different people. She had no children of her own, something that had been a source of sadness in her previous marriage, but she'd channeled that maternal energy into her work with sick children and their families. When Dad first started talking about Elena, Natalie and I exchanged cautiously optimistic glances during our weekly family phone calls. He'd mentioned little things, how she'd recommended a great book, how she'd made everyone laugh with a story about one of her young patients, how she'd stayed after the meeting to help him understand a particularly complex novel they were discussing. The first time Dad brought Elena to Sunday dinner at his house, a tradition we'd maintained even after Mom's death, I could see immediately why he was drawn to her. She was warm and genuine, with this incredible ability to listen intently when someone was speaking and ask thoughtful questions that showed she was really paying attention. She had shoulder-length dark hair that she wore in soft waves, kind brown eyes, and a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. More importantly, she brought out a side of Dad that we hadn't seen since before Mom got sick. He was more animated during conversations, quicker to laugh, and there was a lightness in his demeanor that had been missing for years. Elena seemed to genuinely enjoy his stories about his students and his passion for American history, and she shared his love of classic movies and long walks through Millbrook's historic downtown area. About 6 months into their relationship, Elena started joining us for family dinners more regularly, and she fit seamlessly into our dynamic. She asked me thoughtful questions about my work in software development, something most people found either boring or incomprehensible. She complimented Natalie on her fashion sense and asked for advice about where to shop for clothes that would work for someone with her body type and professional requirements.
Most importantly, Elena never tried to replace Mom or pretend that Dad's grief hadn't been a significant part of his journey. She acknowledged Mom's importance in our family's history and made it clear that she had no intention of erasing those memories or asking Dad to compartmentalize his past in order to move forward with her. When Dad told us 4 months ago that Elena and I were thinking seriously about getting married, both Natalie and I were genuinely excited. During one of our three-way phone calls, something we did every Sunday evening to stay connected despite the distance, Dad seemed almost shy as he brought up the topic. Elena and I have been talking about taking the next step, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice even through the phone. We're not getting any younger, and we've both learned that life is too short to waste time when you know you found something good. Dad, that's wonderful, I said immediately. Elena is amazing, and you two are so good together. Have you talked about timing?
Natalie jumped in with her characteristic enthusiasm. Oh my gosh, yes! We need to start planning. What kind of ceremony are you thinking? Something small and intimate, right? Elena doesn't have a huge family, and I think after everything we've been through, keeping it simple would be perfect. Dad laughed, a sound that still felt like a small miracle every time I heard it. Exactly what I was thinking. Maybe the community center where we met, followed by dinner at Rosario's. Rosario's was Dad's favorite Italian restaurant, a family-owned place where he and Mom used to go for their anniversary every year. That sounds perfect, I agreed. Do you have a timeline in mind? I'll need to request time off work, but that's not a problem at all. We're thinking maybe late fall, October or November, when the weather's still nice but not too hot. Elena's always loved autumn, and it would give us time to plan without feeling rushed. For the next several weeks, I kept expecting to hear more concrete details about the wedding planning. Every time I talked to Dad or Natalie, I'd ask about dates, guest lists, whether they needed help with anything, but I always got vague responses. "Oh, we're still figuring out the details," Natalie would say. "You know, Dad, he wants everything to be perfect, so he's taking his time making decisions." Or, "Dad and I are still discussing a few things. We want to make sure we get it right." I didn't think much of these responses at the time. Planning a wedding, even a small one, involves a lot of moving pieces, and I figured they were just being thoughtful about their choices. I was busy with a major product launch at work anyway, so I was happy to let them handle the logistics as long as they gave me enough notice to clear my schedule. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. I should have noticed that the conversations about the wedding always seemed to happen when it was just me and one other person on the phone, never when all three of us were talking together. I should have paid attention to the fact that Natalie never asked for my input on anything, never suggested we go dress shopping together, never mentioned wanting my help with any of the traditional sister activities that you'd expect around a father's wedding. But I trusted them. I trusted my family. I thought we were all excited about the same thing and working toward the same goal of celebrating Dad's happiness and Elena's integration into our family. I was so incredibly, devastatingly wrong about everything. The more I think about it now, sitting here in my apartment staring at these wedding photos that prove my entire family's betrayal, the more I realize that this level of deception doesn't happen overnight. This required planning, coordination, and a collective decision by everyone in my family that I was somehow unworthy of being included in one of the most important days in Dad's life since Mom's death. And the fact that they chose to lie about me being sick, that they created this elaborate fiction about me being hospitalized with pneumonia, shows a level of calculated cruelty that I'm still struggling to comprehend. What kind of people do something like this? And what kind of daughter have I been that my own family felt justified in treating me this way? Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about the wedding constantly. I started browsing bridesmaid dress websites during my lunch breaks, researching small wedding venues in the Millbrook area, and even looking up autumn flower arrangements that might work for a community center ceremony. But every time I tried to bring up these ideas during my weekly phone calls with Dad or Natalie, I got responses that seemed oddly vague and non-committal.
"Oh, that's sweet of you to think about, honey," Dad would say when I mentioned photographers I'd found. "Elena and I are still discussing what kind of photos we want. We might just ask someone from book club who's good with a camera to take some casual shots." Or Natalie would say, "Those dress ideas are pretty, but I think Elena wants to keep everything really low-key. Maybe we should wait until Elena brings up the bridesmaid thing before we start planning outfits." At the time, I interpreted these responses as them being considerate about not overwhelming Elena with too much input from people who hadn't been part of the relationship from the beginning. I figured they were probably right to let the bride and groom take the lead on planning decisions, especially since Elena might have her own vision for how she wanted things to go. But looking back now, I realize these were the first signs that something was wrong. When you're genuinely excited about including someone in your wedding, you don't deflect their enthusiasm. You embrace it. You ask for their opinions and make them feel like their input is valued. The deflection became even more pronounced as August turned into September. Every Sunday during our three-way family phone calls, I'd ask about wedding progress, and I'd get increasingly vague responses. "We're still working on the guest list," Dad would say. "Elena wants to make sure we don't forget anyone important." "We haven't nailed down a specific date yet," Natalie would add. "They want to make sure the community center is available and that it doesn't conflict with any major events in town." "The catering situation is more complicated than they thought," Dad would explain another week. "Elena has some dietary restrictions we're trying to accommodate, and we want to make sure there are options everyone can enjoy."
Each of these explanations sounded reasonable on its own, but together they started to form a pattern that should have worried me. How hard is it to pick a date for a small wedding? How complicated could catering be for 30 or 40 people? Why was every aspect of the planning apparently more difficult than expected? I started to wonder if maybe Dad and Elena were having second thoughts about getting married, or if there were financial concerns they weren't comfortable discussing. I even worried that Elena might be feeling overwhelmed by the idea of officially joining our family, given that she'd been divorced before and might be hesitant about making such a big commitment again. During one particularly frustrating phone call in mid-September, I decided to address my concerns directly. "Dad, is everything okay with the wedding planning?" I asked. "I don't want to be pushy, but it seems like you guys are having trouble making decisions about things that don't seem that complicated. Is there anything Natalie and I can do to help move things along?" There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long before Dad responded. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Elena and I just want to make sure we get everything right. We're not in any hurry, and we'd rather take our time than make decisions we'll regret later." "But Dad," I pressed gently, "it's already mid-September. If you're thinking about an October or November wedding, shouldn't some of these details be finalized soon? I mean, I need to request time off work, and if Natalie and I are going to be involved in the ceremony, we should probably start thinking about what we're wearing." Another pause. Then Dad said, "You know what? Let me talk to Elena about where we stand with everything, and we'll give you a more concrete update next week. I think we've just been so caught up in enjoying being engaged that we haven't been as organized about the practical stuff as we should be." That explanation satisfied me at the time, but now I realize it was probably the moment when Dad and Natalie made the final decision to exclude me from the wedding. I had pushed for concrete information, and instead of providing it, they had bought themselves time to figure out how to handle the situation they'd created. The following Sunday, during our usual phone call, Natalie delivered what I now know was a carefully crafted piece of manipulation. "Sam, Dad and Elena have been talking, and they've decided to push the wedding back to early December," Natalie said, her voice carrying just the right amount of disappointment. "Elena's parents are having some health issues, and they're not sure they'll be able to travel in October or November. Rather than get married without them there, Dad and Elena decided to wait until the situation stabilizes." This explanation made perfect sense to me. Elena was close to her parents, and it would be heartbreaking for them to miss her wedding because of health problems. I felt bad for Elena having to postpone what should be a happy celebration because of family stress. "That's probably the right decision," I said.
It would be awful for Elena to have to worry about her parents during what should be the happiest day of her life. December weddings can be really beautiful too, especially if they do something with winter themes. Exactly, Natalie agreed. And it gives everyone more time to plan and prepare. Elena's been feeling a little overwhelmed by all the decisions anyways, so the extra time will probably be good for her stress levels. For the next month, I barely brought up the wedding during our family conversations. I figured they had enough to worry about with Elena's parents' health situation, and I didn't want to add any pressure by constantly asking about planning updates. It wasn't until early October that I started to get suspicious about what was really happening. I was having lunch with my coworker, Jessica, the same person whose Instagram story would eventually reveal the truth about Dad's wedding. Jessica had grown up in a small town about an hour from Millbrook, and she was familiar with the area. When I mentioned that my dad was getting married in December, but that the plans had been delayed due to family health issues, Jessica made a comment that stopped me cold. Oh, that's too bad about the delay. December weddings in small Colorado towns can be tricky because of weather. My cousin got married in December a few years ago, and they had to have a backup plan in case of snow. Is your dad's fiancée from the area originally? She's from Millbrook. They met at a book club at the library. That's sweet. What's her last name? My mom knows pretty much everyone in that area, and she might know the family. Rodriguez. Elena Rodriguez. She's a pediatric nurse at the hospital there. Oh my God, Elena Rodriguez? My mom definitely knows her. She took care of my little cousin when he had pneumonia last year. Small world. What a coincidence that she's marrying your dad. I smiled, happy to hear another confirmation of Elena's reputation as a caring nurse. But then Jessica said something that made my blood run cold. Wait, didn't she just get engaged recently? My mom mentioned seeing an engagement announcement in the local paper sometime in the last few weeks. I think she said the wedding was happening soon, like maybe this month or next month. Are you sure it's December? I stared at Jessica, my mind racing. What do you mean, an engagement announcement? My dad proposed to her in July. And what do you mean the wedding is happening soon?
Jessica looked confused. I might be thinking of someone else. Let me text my mom and ask. She's always on top of local news and gossip. While Jessica texted her mother, I sat there feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Could there be another Elena Rodriguez in Millbrook? It was possible, but given that Jessica had specifically mentioned the pediatric nursing job, it seemed unlikely. Jessica's phone buzzed with a response from her mother, and as Jessica read the message, her expression changed from confusion to concern. Sam, Jessica said slowly, my mom says Elena Rodriguez, the pediatric nurse, is definitely getting married this month. She saw her at the grocery store last week, and Elena mentioned that she was stressed about final wedding preparations. She's marrying a high school history teacher. The world started spinning around me. What day? I managed to whisper. Jessica texted her mother again, and within minutes, she had an answer that confirmed my worst fears. This Saturday, October 28th. My mom says the whole town is talking about it because Elena is so well liked at the hospital. Sam, what's going on? You look like you're about to be sick. That was the moment I realized that my family had been lying to me for months. Not just avoiding the topic or being vague about details, but actively, deliberately lying about when the wedding was happening. They were planning to get married in 4 days, and I knew nothing about it. But even then, sitting in that restaurant with Jessica staring at me with growing alarm, I couldn't quite believe that the lie was intentional. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Dad and Elena had decided to move the wedding up and hadn't had a chance to tell me yet. Maybe there was some miscommunication about the December date. I was still holding on to hope that this was all a misunderstanding right up until the moment I saw those Instagram photos 5 days later and realized that my family hadn't just failed to invite me to the wedding. They had actively convinced everyone that I was too sick to attend, creating an elaborate fiction to explain my absence, while simultaneously protecting themselves from having to admit they'd chosen to exclude me. That level of calculated deception doesn't happen by accident. It requires planning, coordination, and a collective decision by everyone involved that I was somehow unworthy of being included in one of the most important days in Dad's life. And the worst part? They'd made me feel grateful for their non-existent consideration of my fictional illness.